Welcome to The Real News. I'm Mark Steiner. Good to have you all with us once again. On Thursday, the Chinese Parliament, the National People's Congress, passed the National Security Law, which applies to Hong Kong. The full details of the law have not been made public, but it includes banning acts of dissent, subversion, or disloyalty, and allows the Chinese security forces to operate freely in Hong Kong. Mass protests in Hong Kong against this legislation erupted last week as the news of the new law spread, but the police put down these demonstrations with a really heavy hand, and the legislation proceeded at a lightning speed seems to be taking over. The U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo tweeted that Hong Kong is no longer autonomous. What does that mean? Although he ended the tweet by saying that the U.S. stands with Hong Kong, whatever that means, the legal significance of his statement could mean that trade agreements and visa arrangements for residents of Hong Kong will be more difficult with the United States. We're joined now by Kevin Lin, once again joining us. He's an activist and researcher at Hong Kong University, a member of the Laozong Collective, and co-edits the Made in China journal. And Kevin, welcome back to The Real News. It's always good to have you with us.
Thank you.
So let me, before we get into kind of the heart of what this means, I really want to kind of explore this, why it's happening now, you know, in the midst of this COVID-19 pandemic spreading across the globe and in Hong Kong as well. And so what's the connection here? You have to ask that question first, I think.
Yeah, I think this national security legislation could have been in the work for months now. So it's well to remember that the National People's Congress was delayed for about three months. It was supposed to have take place back in February, but because of the pandemic, it was postponed to May. So it could have been in the work for several months, and we know essentially. The Chinese central government has lost confidence in the Hong Kong government's ability to stop the protests or to introduce similar legislations that essentially criminalize legitimate political activities as well as serious illegal activities. So this could have been in the work for them for several months now.
So not to stay on this point too long, just too much to talk about here, Kevin. But I mean, from some people have been saying that the pro-democracy groups have been calling for quarantines, and some people have argued that this law being legislated so quickly dovetails with that kind of politically good timing for, even though it's been planned for a while, this moment to really hit it. It seems to be some people are arguing the timing was just right for the People's Republic of China.
Yeah, that could very well be true. I think this is a moment where, because of the quarantine and restrictions, that the police essentially is very, very easy to use the restrictions to disperse the crowds. So that has been really effective in terms of just controlling the protesters. But I think the timing is definitely a politically calculated one.
So a lot of countries around the world at this moment, including the United States, European Union, condemned China for promoting this national security law. But other than saying disapprove, they don't seem to have any real strategy to ensure autonomy of Hong Kong or the freedom of the residents. How do you explain the fact that pro-democracy activists in Hong Kong continue to organize protests against such overwhelming odds without any real external support?
There is still quite a bit of political autonomy and space right now in Hong Kong to organize a protest. I think what people are really worried about is this national security legislation is going to take away that freedom almost completely, because essentially, as you said in the introduction, it's going to criminalize not just subversion, not secessions per se, but perfectly legitimate political actions could also be penalized and criminalized.
I mean, so do you think that this law of national security is practically called the end of the notion of one country, two systems? That's been an arrangement since Britain turned Hong Kong over to the People's Republic of China. I mean, are we seeing the beginning of the end here?
Yeah, I think for many people, this is really the end of the one country, two system arrangement. To explain the legislation essentially bypassed the Hong Kong legislature. So again, because I think the Chinese national government doesn't think that the Hong Kong government is able to introduce legislation like this, so it bypassed the legislature completely. and that usually is really concerning. But at the same time, this is not the first time a national security legislation was attempted. Um, Back in 2003, there was a attempt to introduce such legislation by the Hong Kong government, and that was defeated because 500,000 people went down to the street and protest against the legislation, and it was withdrawn. So I think it's still up in the air, even though it calls for pessimism. I think there's still a chance that if people are mobilized, there's a chance that they could be defeated.
So I'm very curious, since what is the sense of your fellow protesters, of the men and women in the street? What is their sense of where it is now, and how desperate or hopeful you find the people around you are in these demonstrations and what's happening? I mean, give us a sense of what's happening on the ground and how it's seething and what's happening.
I think you're seeing both. You're seeing a lot of despair, a lot of desperation, because it's one thing to protest against the Hong Kong government. It's quite another thing to be able to stop the Chinese national government. So there's a lot of desperation. A lot of people are talking about immigrating to other countries. At the same time, I think that the protest returned straight away right after the announcement. So I think that's both are happening. A lot of people are in despair, but at the same time, a lot of people are also reacting against this.
So how, and finally, I'm just two quick things here. I mean, how are you feeling personally, and other people around you, in terms of your own safety about the future and where this could take you? I mean, I have family that lives in Hong Kong, and there was I have a nephew there, and who was saying they're all very kind of concerned that this could mean a mass emigration from Hong Kong. It could mean that because the Chinese government, People's Republic, is such a powerful economy, there's very little the world can do, even if it wanted to. So what about those two different, very different, but really kind of powerful movements?
Yeah, I think it's perfectly understandable why many people are considering immigration, although that's only feasible for a fairly small percentage of people who are wealthy enough and have the ways to immigrate to other countries, especially in a time like this where countries are closing doors to immigrants. So the majority of people, especially working people, are going to be in Hong Kong. I think that the fight has to be here. And I think once people, moving on from the initial reactions of desperation, I think I'm confident people are going to be able to be organized and push back against the sort of the legislation.
So finally, I mean, what do you think that the viewers that are watching this across the United States and Canada, across the globe, what should we be looking for? What should be our response? What should be the government's responses in the places that we live?
Yeah, this is definitely what's happening in Hong Kong is part of a bigger battle between US and China. It's just kind of the latest manifestation of the intensifying rivalry between the US government and the Chinese government, and sort of Hong Kong is being sacrificed in this kind of great power rivalry. And for us, and for people in the States, and for leftists in the States, I think the really the target, the main enemy still at home is the U.S. government, which is primarily responsible for escalating tensions right now, and very often using racism to sort of escalate the tensions with China. So I think that's a primary responsibility, is to counter that escalation at home by the Trump administration, by the right-wing media, but also by the Biden campaign, which has tried to outdo Trump by putting out like a political campaign ad that says basically Trump is not tough enough on China. But at the same time, I think people should also be critical of the Chinese government, and it will be a disservice to all the social movement activists in China if we turn a blind eye to the domestic repressions within China. So I think we as leftists, as progressives, we need to be critical and opposed to both the Chinese state and the U.S. state.
I mean, you said it very clearly and concisely. I mean, I think that's a really important message to give out, that given being stuck between both the People's Republic of China and the United States, with the administrations that they have, that this movement that you're a part of, much of it is left, but it is democratic all the way through, and it's a really different voices trying to be heard. And I think that gets lost in all of this, can get lost in all of this. So that message you just gave, I think, was really important for us to hear. Kevin Lin, I deeply appreciate you staying up so late to talk with us tonight and being with us today. And we want you to stay safe. We'll stay in touch. We'll keep telling your story as much as we can. And thank you so much. And please, as I said, please stay safe as you can.
Thank you.
We've been talking to Kevin Lin, Hong Kong University researcher, about what's going on in Hong Kong. Well, of course, we've been saying on this, we've been talking about this a while. We won't let it go. And in the midst of this COVID-19, please, everybody, stay safe, stay home, be careful. I'm Mark Steiner here for the Real News Network. Take care.